Today we're going to finish the tumbler we started in the epoxy glitter method video. You can find the link to that video in the description above. The items we'll be using today include the beautiful tumbler we made, Mod Podge clear acrylic sealer, Part A, Part B of epoxy. Again, I use ProMarine, baby wipes, gloves, medicine cups, tongue depressor. After glittering the cup that we used yesterday, I let it sit for about 8 to 10 hours to let the epoxy adhere completely to the tumbler. Starting the next steps too soon will cause your glitter on the tumbler to shift, and we don't want that to happen. So after I let it sit, I then spray the tumbler all the way around with the Mod Podge acrylic spray. Even though most glitters you purchase will be solvent resistant, I always spray my tumblers to make sure that the color does not shift before I go on to the next step. It also allows me to handle the tumbler easily without brushing any of the glitter off while I'm using it. I allow the tumbler to sit for about an hour after I sprayed it with the Mod Podge. Next, we need to get our epoxy ready for the second coating on the tumbler. I'll be using a tablespoon for each part, the A and B. It's usually a 1-to-1 mix ratio for epoxy. As you can see, I've made marks to make sure that I can see where I need to fill to on my medicine cups. Today, we'll be using a tablespoon of each. If you watched the video yesterday, you know that I always pour Part B into Part A. It's a personal preference, I just find it easier to do. Use the tongue depressor to scrape all of the one part into the next part so that they can stay as equal as possible. Okay, I'm going to put a paper towel under this, just in case any spills out. We're going to try to make sure that doesn't happen. So I try and pull the thicker part up through the thinner part. It really helps the mixing, I think. It's important to mix the epoxy really well. If the epoxy is undermixed, once it's applied to your tumbler, the tumbler is going to remain tacky and it's never going to quite dry. So the more you mix, the better. I have never encountered a consequence from over mixing. Again, make sure that you stick your tongue depressor all the way to the bottom, circle all the way around, and don't forget to scrape the sides. Hopefully you can see this. We want our epoxy to be as clear as possible and not cloudy. Practically see-through. Now you'll notice that when we mix a bit slower, we want as few of these bubbles as possible. There are some people after this step that will heat theirs up or let it sit for an extra 5 minutes. This isn't something that I do, but I won't discount it. It really works for some people. Now that the epoxy's mixed, we're ready to put our tumbler on the turner and put on our second coat of epoxy. Okay, we've got our tumbler on the turner. As you can see, it's spinning. I'm putting my glove on so I don't get my hands all on the epoxy. I like to pull it tight so I know I have good control. I'm going to take the epoxy and I'm going to spill it over the cup as it turns to let it get started. I don't start rubbing it yet, I just sort of spill it over. It's going to take probably about half this cup to get it started. Alright, once we've made it all the way around, I'm going to start spreading out that epoxy. Again, I start from the bottom and spread towards the top. I don't try to hurry, I just let the spinner go, just moving from one side to the other, making sure my finger falls off the edge. So I'm making sure that edge is getting a good cover too. Like you saw in the other video, I'm going to go side to side to make sure that the epoxy adheres to all the glitter on the tumbler, and that'll help me from getting fish eyes once the epoxy has dried. Make sure we go all the way around the cup, just like we did when we started. Make sure every part of the cup is getting touched with the epoxy. And once we've made it all the way around, we're going to pour a little bit more epoxy on top of this. Okay. I'm not too worried about if the epoxy gets on the silver part. We're going to clean that right off at the end. I'm going to put a little bit more epoxy on. Again, I just move the cup back and forth, letting it pour at a steady stream. We'll let it get all the way around. And then once again, I'm going to move the epoxy from the bottom of the cup to the top. And this time I'm going to purposely put my finger just over the line because I want to make sure that this epoxy gets really good here at the crease and then all the way to the top. As you can see here, I'm going on the silver part, but that's okay. We're going to fix that in just a second. Okay. I'm going to put the last bit of my epoxy on there because I don't want to waste any. If I can avoid getting fish eyes and bubbles, it'll make for a really good second coat. Just take my finger in here and get the rest. Do one more round of swiping. I've made it all the way around. Oh, I see just a little bit here. There we go. All right, now we're gonna fix all this epoxy that you see on the end. We're gonna clean that up. That's what the baby wipe is for. Baby wipes are excellent for getting epoxy off tables, your hands. I haven't figured out how to get it off my jeans yet, but I'm working on it. So I take the baby wipe, I just sort of wrap it around one finger, and I'm gonna take this and just follow the edge of the glitter as the turner turns the tumbler. My hand will stay stationary and the cup will continue to turn. Let me see if I can zoom this in for you some. My hand isn't moving. I'm just clearing the epoxy off the metal piece, sort of using my fingernail in that line between the metal and the glitter to guide me. Once you get too much, I just move my finger to another spot and start again. I think I made it all the way around there. I'm going to get this bit on the edge cleared up. Alright, I'm going to go just one more time here, making sure I get every little bit off that silver part. Because once it dries, it's super hard to get off. Get this little bit right here. All right, I'm going to move you over just so that you can see that now the metal part is clean. We used our baby wipe to do that. And then we have epoxy on the rest of the tumbler. I'm going to leave this tumbler to sit here for about the next 8 to 10 hours. Once I know it's dry, we'll move on to the next step. So I just pulled the tumbler off the turner from when we epoxied it last. As you can see, it's still got a lot of shine and sparkle. And I think that has a lot to do with the type of glitter I'm using from the brand. Things we want to do now is we want to sand it. We're going to sand here at the top all the way around, up here on the edge. We're going to sand the side of any points or dents there may be. And then I'm going to sand the bottom here just to smooth it out a little. So I'll take my fine sandpaper, and as you can see I've already started here. And I'm just going to sand around. I don't want to sand down too much because I want there to still be glitter there, but I just want to smooth it out some. Some people do this with wet sandpaper. I've never done it with wet sandpaper, but if this is work for you, that might be an option. Make it all the way around here. We're almost done. And then I'm just going to sand up top here. I don't have any rough spots coming on the edge of the lip of the cup. Okay, so we got all the way around. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom next. And I just fold my sandpaper right on my finger there. And I just go a little bit down here at the bottom. I don't want to scratch the metal part, so you got to be a little bit more careful here. one takes a little bit more time. We're just going to be a little more gentle. Switch where I'm sanding. Switch my paper again. A little more to go. Last bit. So next thing I want to do is I'm going to fill the cup. I'm going to slide my hand up and down to see if I feel any bumps, and when I do, like I feel one right here, I'm going to take my sandpaper and I'm going to sand that down until I make sure I can't feel it again. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to go up and down the cup. Now you could choose just to go all the way around. That might be easier, but I choose to just focus on the certain points that I can feel. Didn't have any fish eyes, which is great, and I really contribute that to when we epoxy the tumbler, when I go like this instead of up and down, because I make sure that the epoxy really has contact with every part of the tumbler. That's what creates your fish eyes, is when the epoxy separates or doesn't have complete contact. You can see when I sand, it takes a little bit of the shine, makes it dull. We're going to fix that. When we put the epoxy on, we use 2 tablespoons of epoxy, which means we put a pretty good thick coat. Some people use a very thin coat, so you have to be very careful where you're sanding. But since I use such a thick coat this time around, I don't have to be so careful. I can sand quite a bit. All right, now we've got our cup sanded. Next, we need to get some paper towels. So I got my paper towel, and then I use alcohol. And I'm just going to clean up all this sanding that I did, because we don't want that dust on our tumbler when we go to epoxy it the next time. And you'll see the shine's not quite back yet, but all that dust is gone. But when we go to epoxy it this last time, all that shine's going to come right back up. So as you can see, I have rubbed it with alcohol all the way around, and now I'm ready to put my decal on it, whether it be a design or a name, and then we're going to epoxy it one more time. Okay, we put the tumbler back on the turner. I've put the epoxy on it, and I'm only going to do 2 minor differences this time. So when I start doing back up, to make sure that I get this top lip covered, I'm going to drag it up and go just a little bit over, just so you can see that it's going right over that lip and covering it. And then the second thing I'm going to do is, while I've gone all the way down here on the silver like we did before, we're not going to wipe all that off this time, because we're going to use part of this as the sealer for the cup. Because if we just do it in the crack right here, then it still can chip, but we're going to make it adhere straight to the cup leaving a little bit on this silver part. So I'm going to get my baby wipe, put it back on my finger just like I did before, and instead of going all the way up here to the crack, I'm just going to go right below it and let the turner do its work and keep my hand in the same place. It's going to go all the way around, and this will leave a small space of epoxy still on the tumbler, creating a seal to the cup. See how we did. Can you see how it's left a little rim here? We'll do that all the way around. Make sure it's a nice clean edge. Let your turner do the work. Keep your finger in one place. And if you check back and look at this, probably about an hour, you'll see how this will have leveled out, and you almost won't even be able to tell that there is a line here that we've left over. All right, when it's all done, I'll get back to you. Okay, I just took the tumbler off the turner. It's all done. Still sparkly as ever. We smoothed the rim around the top when we sanded it. You can see right here where we left that little bit of epoxy on the bottom, so it makes a nice, good seal clean with the tumbler. So the last thing I'm going to do, because we tend to leave fingerprints and stuff inside from handling it, is I just take a piece of paper towel, a little bit of acetone, put it inside the cup, and just sort of twist it around, working my way all the way up to the top, cleaning out the inside of any glitter or fingerprint debris that I may have left behind. There you go. Now we have a nice clean cup inside. We didn't get any epoxy up here. Looks nice and clean. Right. I hope this helps everyone. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Again, I'll try to answer everything I can.